Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of woman who believed in taking charge of her own destiny. At 32, she was a successful marketing director at a Fortune 500 company in downtown Chicago. Her designer suits, expensive handbags, and confident stride through the marble lobby of the Pinnacle Tower spoke of someone who had worked hard to climb the corporate ladder. But despite all her professional success, there was one area of her life that remained frustratingly empty: love. She had dated plenty of men over the years, mostly other executives and businessmen who moved in her social circles. They were impressive on paper: Harvard MBAs, investment bankers, lawyers with corner offices. But every relationship felt hollow, like she was dating a resume rather than a person. The conversations were always about stock portfolios, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and networking opportunities. Sarah found herself longing for something real, something genuine. It was on a particularly stressful Tuesday evening that Sarah first really noticed Marcus Johnson. She had been working late again, trying to finish a presentation for the next morning's board meeting. The office was nearly empty, the usual bustle of corporate life replaced by an almost eerie silence. As she made her way to the break room, for her fourth cup of coffee that day, she saw him. Marcus was quietly emptying the trash cans in the accounting department, moving with a deliberate efficiency that spoke of years of experience. He was tall and lean, with kind eyes that seemed to hold depths of wisdom. What struck Sarah most was his demeanor. There was a dignity in the way he carried himself that was unmistakable. While other cleaning staff she had encountered over the years seemed to try to make themselves invisible, Marcus moved with quiet confidence. Their first interaction was brief but memorable. Sarah had dropped a stack of papers while juggling her coffee and laptop bag. Before she could react, Marcus was there, helping her gather the scattered documents. His hands were gentle as he straightened the papers, and when he handed them back to her, their fingers brushed for just a moment. "Thank you so much," Sarah said, looking into his eyes for the first time. "I'm such a klutz when I'm tired." Marcus smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "No problem at all, miss. We all have those days. Hope your presentation goes well. Tomorrow." Sarah was surprised. How did he know about her presentation? But before she could ask, Marcus had already moved on to the next office, leaving her standing there with a strange warmth spreading through her chest. Over the following weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to these brief encounters. She began staying late more often, telling herself it was because she had too much work, but deep down she knew she was hoping to see Marcus. Their conversations were short but increasingly meaningful. Unlike the men she usually dated, Marcus asked about her day not to network or gain something, but because he genuinely seemed to care about her answer. "You look stressed tonight," Marcus observed one evening as Sarah sat at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. "Just the usual corporate drama," Sarah sighed. "Sometimes I wonder if any of this really matters. We spend so much time fighting over market share and quarterly reports, but what are we actually contributing to the world?" Marcus paused in his work, considering her words carefully. "I think the work itself might not be what matters most. It's how you treat the people around you while you're doing it. I've seen executives who make millions but leave everyone around them feeling smaller. And I've seen others who find ways to lift people up even in small ways. You seem like the second type." His words stuck with Sarah long after their conversation ended. Here was a man who worked as a janitor but spoke with more wisdom than most of the executives she knew. There was something about Marcus that drew her in, a authenticity that was rare in her world of corporate politics and social climbing. The months passed. Sarah found herself looking forward to their conversations more than any business meeting or social event. Marcus had a way of seeing through the surface of things, of asking questions that made her think about what she really wanted from life. He never seemed impressed by her title or salary, which was both refreshing and slightly unsettling for someone who had spent years building her identity around professional success. One evening, as autumn painted the Chicago skyline in brilliant oranges and reds, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was working late again, but this time it wasn't about deadlines or presentations. She had been thinking about Marcus all day. about the way he made her feel seen and understood in ways she had never experienced before. When Marcus appeared in her office doorway with his cleaning cart, Sarah felt her heart skip. Tonight felt different somehow, charged with possibility and the weight of unspoken feelings that had been building between them for months. "Another late night?" Marcus asked with that warm smile she had come to treasure. "Actually," Sarah said, her voice slightly trembling with nerves, "I was hoping to talk to you about something important." Marcus set down his spray bottle and gave her his full attention, those kind eyes focused entirely on her face. In that moment, Sarah realized that this man, this janitor who most people in her building probably didn't even notice, had become the most important person in her world. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she stood up from her desk. The words she had been rehearsing all day suddenly felt stuck in her throat. Marcus waited patiently, his expression open and encouraging, completely unaware that his presence had turned her carefully ordered world upside down. "Marcus, I know this might sound crazy," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know we come from completely different worlds, but these past few months of getting to know you have been the happiest I've ever been." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent, giving her space to continue. The silence in the empty office felt heavy with possibility and fear. "I've dated men who had everything on paper," Sarah continued, gaining confidence with each word. "Rich men, powerful men, men who could give me the lifestyle that everyone expects me to want. But none of them ever made me feel the way you do. None of them ever saw me the way you see me." She took a deep breath, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Marcus could hear it. "What I'm trying to say is, Marcus Johnson, will you marry me?" The words hung in the air between them like a bridge neither of them had expected to cross. Sarah watched Marcus's face carefully, searching for any sign of his thoughts. His expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face as if he was trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Sarah," he said finally, his voice gentle but serious, "do you understand what you're asking? Do you really know what this would mean?" "I know it means I'd be the luckiest woman in the world," Sarah replied without hesitation. "I know it means choosing love over everything else I was taught to value. I know it means facing judgment from people who don't understand. But I also know that what we have is real in a way nothing else in my life has ever been." Marcus stepped closer to her, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with the honest smell of hard work. "Sarah, there are things about me you don't know. Important things." "Then tell me," Sarah said, reaching out to take his hands in hers. "Whatever it is, we can face it together." But Marcus shook his head slowly. "Not yet. Not like this. If you're serious about this, about us, then I need you to be sure it's really me you want, not some idea of me you've created in your mind." Sarah felt a flicker of frustration. "Marcus, I've been thinking about this for months. I know exactly who you are. You're kind, you're wise, you're honest in a way that's become so rare I forgot it existed. You see people for who they really are, not what they can do for you. You've never once asked me about my salary or my connections or what I could offer you professionally." "And what about what people will say?" Marcus asked quietly. "What about your family, your friends, your colleagues? Have you thought about how they'll react when you tell them you're marrying the building's janitor?" Sarah's chin lifted defiantly. "Let them talk. I spent 32 years living my life according to other people's expectations. And where did it get me? Lonely nights in an expensive apartment? Meaningless relationships with men who saw me as a trophy to be won. If they can't understand that I've found something real, that's their loss." Marcus studied her face for another long moment, then slowly smiled. It was the same smile that had first caught her attention all those months ago, but now it carried layers of meaning she was only beginning to understand. "You really mean it, don't you?" he said. "I've never meant anything more in my life." "Marcus, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple ring. Nothing fancy. Just a thin silver band that looked like it had been worn smooth by years of handling. "This was my grandmother's," he said quietly. "She always told me to give it. To a woman who loved me for who I was, not what I had." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. "Is that a yes?" she whispered. "That's a yes," Marcus confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "But Sarah, I need you to promise me something. No matter what you learn about me in the coming days, remember this moment. Remember that what we have is real, and that everything I've ever said to you came from my heart." Sarah pulled back to look at him, confused by the seriousness in his tone. "What do you mean? What am I going to learn?" But Marcus just kissed her forehead gently. "Trust me, and remember what I said about judging people by how they treat others, when they don't have to be nice. That's going to matter more than you know." As they held each other in the empty office, surrounded by the glittering lights of Chicago's skyline, Sarah felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in her life she was ready to jump. She had found love in the most unexpected place with the most unexpected person, and she was ready to fight for it. What she didn't know was that the man holding her so tenderly had been fighting his own battle. The battle of falling in love with someone who knew him only as Marcus the janitor, never suspecting that by day he lived a completely different life. A life that would either destroy what they had built together or prove that love really could conquer everything. The weeks following their engagement passed in a whirlwind of secret happiness and growing complications. Sarah couldn't stop staring at the simple silver ring on her finger, spinning it whenever she was nervous or excited, which seemed to be constantly these days. She had told only her assistant and her closest friend about the engagement, and both reactions had been exactly what she expected: shock, concern, and barely concealed disapproval. "Sarah, honey, I love that you're happy, but have you really thought this through?" her friend Jessica had asked over lunch at their usual upscale restaurant. "I mean, what do you really know about this man? Where does he live? What are his goals? How will he support you?" "He doesn't need to support me," Sarah had replied firmly. "I can support myself. And I know everything I need to know about who he is as a person." But privately, Sarah was beginning to realize that Jessica might have a point, though not in the way her friend intended. She did know Marcus's character, his values, his kindness, but she knew surprisingly little about his life outside their evening conversations. He had skillfully deflected most of her questions about his background, his family, his dreams and aspirations. She told herself it didn't matter, that love was about the present and the future, not the past. Marcus had been acting strangely since their engagement, alternating between moments of pure joy and periods of deep thoughtfulness that bordered on worry. Sometimes she would catch him staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, as if he was trying to memorize her face. Other times, she would find him looking at his phone with a frown, typing messages he never shared with her. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked one evening as they sat together in the empty conference room where they had started meeting regularly after work. "You seem distracted lately." Marcus set down his coffee and reached across the table to take her hand. "I've been thinking about our future, about what happens next. Sarah, I need you to meet my family. It's important." Sarah's heart leaped with excitement. This felt like a major step forward, a sign that Marcus was ready to fully commit to their relationship despite his earlier hesitations. "I would love to meet your family," she said eagerly. "When? Where? Should I bring anything?" Marcus smiled at her enthusiasm, but there was still something cautious in his expression. "This Saturday. There's a family gathering at our family home. It's about an hour outside the city." "Our family home? You never mentioned you owned property with your family." "There are a lot of things I haven't mentioned," Marcus said, quietly. "Things you'll understand soon." That Saturday morning, Sarah spent extra time getting ready, wanting to make a good impression on Marcus's family. She chose a simple but elegant dress, nothing too flashy or expensive that might make his relatives uncomfortable. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that reminded her of being a teenager about to meet a boyfriend's parents for the first time. Marcus picked her up in a car she had never seen before, a sleek black sedan that seemed far too expensive for someone working as a janitor. When she commented on it, Marcus simply said it belonged to a friend who had lent it to him for the occasion. As they drove through Chicago's suburbs and into the countryside, Sarah found herself growing more curious about Marcus's background. The further they drove from the city, the larger and more impressive the houses became. When Marcus finally turned into a long, tree-lined driveway, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The house at the end of the drive wasn't a house at all. It was a mansion, a sprawling, elegant estate with perfectly manicured gardens, a circular driveway with a fountain in the center, and more windows than Sarah could count. Several expensive cars were parked in the driveway, and she could see people in elegant clothing moving around what appeared to be an outdoor party setup. "Marcus," Sarah said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "whose house is this?" Marcus parked the car and turned to face her, his expression serious and full of an emotion she couldn't identify. "Sarah, this is my family's home. Our home." "What? Do you mean your home? You're a janitor. This place must be worth millions." 10 million, actually. Maybe 12 now, with the recent improvements. Marcus's voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the tension underneath. Sarah stared at him, her mind struggling to process what he was telling her. "I don't understand. How could your family possibly afford a place like this? And why are you working as a janitor if you come from money?" Marcus took a deep breath, clearly steeling himself for what he was about to say. "Sarah, my full name is Marcus Johnson Sterling. My grandfather was Benjamin Sterling, who founded Sterling Industries. My father is David Johnson Sterling, the current CEO. I'm not just from money, I am money. More money than you could probably imagine." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah gripped the door handle, trying to steady herself as the implications of Marcus's words crashed over her like a wave. "You're telling me you're a billionaire?" she whispered. "Multi-billionaire, technically. I'm the heir to Sterling Industries, which owns everything from tech companies to real estate developments to renewable energy firms. The building where we met? My family owns it." Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. "Then why were you working as a janitor?" "Because I wanted to know what it was like to be treated as an ordinary person. I was tired of people who only saw dollar signs when they looked at me. I wanted to understand how the other half lives, how people treat those they consider beneath them. It was supposed to be temporary, maybe 6 months of working nights and weekends while maintaining my regular life during the day." "Your regular life?" Sarah's voice was getting higher with each question. "Board meetings, charity galas, business deals, the life I was born into, but never chose." Sarah stared at the mansion, at the party full of elegant people, at the man she thought she knew sitting beside her. Everything she had believed about their relationship suddenly felt like a lie. "So when I proposed to you," she said slowly, "you were laughing at me. The poor little executive who thought she was doing something noble by proposing to the janitor." "No." Marcus reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Sarah, no. It was never like that. What I feel for you is real. Everything between us is real." But Sarah was already opening the car door, her mind reeling with betrayal and embarrassment. She had thought she was being brave, choosing love over social expectations. Instead, she had been played by someone who had more money and power than she could ever dream of having. "Sarah, please," Marcus called after her as she started walking back down the driveway. "Let me explain. Let me tell you the whole story." But Sarah didn't stop walking. She couldn't face going into that mansion, couldn't face meeting his family, couldn't face the truth of how naive and foolish she had been. Behind her, she could hear Marcus getting out of the car, could hear him calling her name, but she kept walking, her heart breaking with every step. Sarah walked for nearly 2 miles down the country road before a taxi finally found her, her designer heels creating blisters with every step. She had called for a ride while tears streamed down her face, her hands shaking so badly she could barely operate her phone. The taxi driver, A kind elderly man kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror with concern, but wisely said nothing about the well-dressed woman crying in his back seat. The hour-long ride back to Chicago gave Sarah time to think, and the more she thought, the angrier she became. How could Marcus have let her make such a fool of herself? She had poured her heart out to him, had risked everything she thought she knew about herself and her values, had prepared herself to face judgment and criticism from her peers, all while he had been living a lie. The worst part was remembering all the times she had worried about their differences, all the nights she had lost sleep wondering if she was being fair to him by dragging him into her world of corporate politics and social expectations. Meanwhile, he had been living in a world that made hers look like child's play. Back in her apartment, Sarah sat on her expensive sofa in her expensive dress, staring at the simple silver ring on her finger. Even that had been a lie, she realized. What she had taken for a family heirloom was probably some costume jewelry he had picked up to maintain his disguise. The thought made her feel physically sick. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from Marcus, but she ignored them all. She couldn't bear to hear whatever explanation he might offer, whatever excuse he had prepared for his deception. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine and tried to figure out how she had been so completely fooled by someone. By Monday morning, Sarah had convinced herself that the best thing to do was pretend the whole thing had never happened. She arrived at work early, dressed in her most professional suit, ready to throw herself back into the safe, predictable world of quarterly reports and marketing campaigns. She would forget Marcus Johnson Sterling and his lies, forget her moment of romantic foolishness, and get back to the life she understood. But Marcus had other plans. When Sarah arrived at her office, she found it filled with white roses, dozens and dozens of them covering every surface. Her desk, her bookshelf, even the floor were carpeted with beautiful, fragrant blooms. Her assistant, Jennifer, stood in the doorway looking confused and slightly overwhelmed. "They started arriving at 6 this morning," Jennifer explained. "The delivery guy said there are more coming throughout the day. There's a note." Sarah's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside, in Marcus's careful handwriting, were just a few lines. "Sarah, these roses represent every day I wanted to tell you the truth but was too afraid of losing you. Please give me a chance to explain. The real story is more complicated than you know. Marcus." Sarah crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, but she couldn't bring herself to have the flowers removed. They smelled too much like hope, and, despite her anger, she wasn't quite ready to give up on that feeling entirely. Throughout the day, more gifts arrived, not expensive things that would have emphasized the wealth gap between them, but thoughtful gestures that reminded her of their conversations. A book of poetry by the author they had discussed one evening. A small potted plant like the ones she had mentioned wanting for her office. A coffee mug with a funny saying that referenced an inside joke between them. Each gift came with a note explaining why he had chosen it, referencing specific conversations they had shared. It was clear that Marcus had been paying attention to everything she said, remembering details that even some of her closest friends forgot. Despite herself, Sarah found her anger beginning to mix with confusion. By Wednesday, Sarah's office looked like a garden, and her colleagues were starting to ask questions she didn't know how to answer. That evening, as she was finally preparing to leave work, she found Marcus waiting by the elevator. Not Marcus the janitor in his work uniform, but Marcus the billionaire in an expensive suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary. "Please," he said simply. "Just give me 10 minutes. If you still hate me after that, I'll leave you alone forever." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since learning the truth. The expensive clothes couldn't hide the fact that he looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes and a drawn expression that spoke of sleepless nights. Despite everything, her heart ached seeing him in pain. 10 minutes, she said finally. They rode the elevator down in silence, the space between them feeling like an ocean. Marcus led her to a small coffee shop around the corner, the kind of place they never would have gone together when she thought he was a janitor. Ironically, now that she knew he could afford anything, this simple setting felt more honest than the fancy restaurants where she had eaten with other wealthy men. "I need you to understand why I did what I did," Marcus began once they were seated. "I've been wealthy my entire life. I've never had a conversation with someone who didn't know my net worth, never been on a date where I wasn't wondering if the person was interested in me or my inheritance, never had a friend who didn't want something from me." Sarah wanted to stay angry, but something in his voice made her listen. 3 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Victoria. Beautiful, sophisticated, from a good family. I thought I loved her, thought she loved me. 2 weeks before the wedding, I overheard her talking to her sister about how she was looking forward to the jewelry and houses she'd get in the divorce, about how she'd already picked out her next husband from among my business associates. Marcus paused, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup as if it could anchor him. That's when I decided I needed to know what it was like to be valued for who I am, rather than what I have. The janitor job was supposed to be temporary, just long enough to understand how normal people interact with each other. I never expected to fall in love. Sarah felt some of her anger beginning to crack. "But you let me propose to you. You let me think I was being brave and rebellious when you knew the whole time that you had more money and power than I ever will. Because for the first time in my life, someone loved me without knowing about any of that. Do you have any idea how rare that is, how precious? Sarah, when you proposed to me, it wasn't the poor girl proposing to the rich boy. It was someone who saw my character, my heart, proposing to the person I really am underneath all the wealth and expectations." Sarah stared at him across the table, her emotions in turmoil. Part of her wanted to forgive him, to understand his perspective, but another part of her felt manipulated and foolish. "How do I know any of what we had was real?" she asked quietly. "How do I know you weren't just playing a role, enjoying the novelty of pretending to be someone else?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. "Because," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "everything I told you about values, about how people should treat each other, about what really matters in life, that was all real. The man you fell in love with isn't Marcus the janitor or Marcus the billionaire. He's just Marcus, the guy who thinks you're the most incredible woman he's ever met." Sarah stared into Marcus's eyes across the small coffee shop table, searching for signs of deception but finding only raw honesty and vulnerability. The anger she had been holding on to like armor began to soften, replaced by something more complicated. Hurt mixed with understanding, betrayal tangled with love. "I need time to think," she said finally, pulling her hand back from his. "This changes everything, Marcus. Not just about us, but about how I see myself, my choices, everything I thought I knew about our relationship." Marcus nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his expression. "I understand. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, please know that nothing about how I feel has changed. If anything, knowing that you loved me when you thought I had nothing makes me love you even more." Over the next few days, Sarah found herself analyzing every conversation she and Marcus had ever had, looking for clues she might have missed. How had she not noticed the designer watch he sometimes wore, the way he spoke about business and economics with such detailed knowledge? The fact that he never seemed worried about money, never mentioned struggling to pay bills or needing overtime. Work? But then she remembered other things too. The genuine respect he had shown for every person who worked in the building, from security guards to cleaning staff to food service workers. The way he had talked about his grandmother's ring with such reverence and love. The nights he had listened to her work frustrations without trying to fix them or minimize them, just offering support and understanding. Sarah's friend, Jessica, took her to lunch again, this time with a completely different agenda. "Okay, so I was wrong," Jessica admitted over salads at their usual restaurant. "When you first told me about Marcus, I was worried you were making a mistake. But honey, do you realize what you've stumbled into? This man is one of the wealthiest bachelors in the country, and he's head over heels for you." "That's exactly the problem," Sarah replied, pushing lettuce around her plate. "How do I know he's really in love with me, and not just infatuated with the novelty of someone who didn't know who he was?" "Because," Jessica said practically, "he's had plenty of opportunities to walk away. Think about it. You rejected him, you walked away from him, you've been ignoring his calls. If this was just a game to him, wouldn't he have moved on by now?" Rich men don't usually chase women who make them work this hard. That evening, Sarah made a decision. She drove to Marcus's family estate, her heart pounding as she approached the imposing gates. This time, instead of running away, she pressed the intercom button. "Ms. Martinez," came a voice she recognized as Marcus. "Thank you for coming." The gates opened, and Sarah drove up the long driveway she had fled from just days earlier. Marcus was waiting for her on the front steps, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more like the man she had fallen in love with than the billionaire heir she was still trying to understand. "I want the whole truth," Sarah said without preamble as she got out of her car. "Everything. No more secrets. No more hidden identities. If we're going to have any chance at all, I need to know exactly who you are." Marcus nodded and led her, not into the imposing mansion, but around to a smaller building on the property, a converted carriage house that had been transformed into a cozy home. "This is where I actually live," he explained. "The main house is for family gatherings and business entertaining, but this is my space." The carriage house was beautiful but comfortable, filled with books and plants and artwork that reflected the man she had gotten to know. This felt like Marcus, not the janitor disguise or the billionaire heir, but the real person behind both facades. "My full name is Marcus David Johnson Sterling," he began, settling onto a comfortable sofa across from her. "I'm 28 years old, and I've been groomed my entire life to take over Sterling Industries. I have an MBA from Wharton, but I've never used it because I went straight into the family business. I speak 4 languages. I've traveled to over 40 countries, and I've never had a job that I actually applied for or earned on my own merit." Sarah listened quietly, beginning to understand the weight of expectations he had carried his entire life. "I started the janitor experiment because I was suffocating in my regular life. Every conversation was scripted. Every relationship was strategic. Every decision was made based on what would be best for the company or the family reputation. I wanted to know what it felt like to be judged on my character instead of my bank account." "And what did you learn?" Sarah asked. Marcus smiled sadly. "I learned that most people are kinder than I expected. I learned that hard work has a dignity to it that I never understood before. And I learned that love, real love, is the rarest and most valuable thing in the world, worth more than all the money my family has ever made." Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Marcus, I need you to understand something too. When I proposed to you, it wasn't just about loving you despite your job. It was about loving someone who I thought understood what it was like to work hard for everything you have, someone who knew the value of things because you'd had to earn them. Finding out you're wealthy doesn't just change your story, it changes mine too." "How does it change your story?" "Because now I look like every other gold digger who ever chased a rich man. Now my proposal looks calculated instead of brave. Now everyone who hears our story will assume I knew who you were all along." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. "Sarah, do you remember what I said to you about judging people by how they treat others when they don't have to be nice?" She nodded. "In all the months I watched you at work, you were kind to everyone. You learned the names of the security guards. You always said thank you to the cleaning staff. You held doors for people and asked about their families. You treated everyone with respect, including me, when you thought I was nobody important. That's who you are." Marcus moved closer to her on the sofa. "And when you proposed to me, you weren't proposing to someone you thought could give you a better life. You were proposing to someone you thought would need you to support him financially and socially. If you were a gold digger, Sarah, you're terrible at it." Despite everything, Sarah found herself laughing at this. Marcus reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. "I know I hurt you by not telling you the truth sooner," Marcus said. "I know I put you in an impossible position. But Sarah, what we have is real. The conversations, the connection, the love, none of that was fake. I may have lied about my job, but I never lied about my feelings." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the man she had fallen in love with. Not the janitor, not the billionaire, but the person who had listened to her dreams and fears, who had made her laugh, who had seen her for who she truly was. "If we do, this she said slowly. If we try to make this work, everything changes. Your family, my career, our entire lives. It all becomes different. I know, Marcus said. The question is, are you willing to find out what different looks like? Sarah thought about the simple silver ring still sitting in her jewelry box, at home, about the roses filling her office, about the choice between the safe life she had planned and the unknown future she could have with this complicated, wonderful, infuriating man. I'm willing to try, she said finally. But no more lies, Marcus, no more secrets. If we're doing this, we're doing it with complete honesty. Complete honesty, Marcus agreed, bringing her hand to his lips. Starting with the fact that my grandmother's ring is actually worth about $50,000, and I was terrified you'd recognize the craftsmanship and figure out I wasn't who I claimed to be. Sarah stared at him in shock. $50,000? Marcus, I can't wear something that expensive. Sarah, Marcus said gently. You're going to have to get used to expensive things. But more importantly, you're going to have to get used to the fact that none of the expensive things matter to me as much as you do. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat at his words. Despite all the complications, all the lies and revelations, the fundamental truth remained unchanged. She loved this man, and he loved her back. So what happens now, she asked. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him since the truth came out. Now you meet my family, for real this time, and I meet yours, and we figure out how to build a life together that's honest. About who we both are. Your family is going to hate me, Sarah said nervously. They'll think I'm after your money. My family is going to love you, Marcus corrected. Because they've been watching me pretend to be happy my entire life, and they'll recognize that you make me actually happy. Besides, my mother has been hoping for years that I'd find someone who loved me for myself instead of my trust fund. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing at the edge of a new life. It wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, and probably more surprises along the way. But looking at Marcus, seeing the hope and love in his eyes, she knew it would be worth it. Okay, she said. Let's go meet your family. But I'm keeping my own job, my own apartment, and my own independence. If we're doing this, we're doing it, as equals. I wouldn't have it any other way, Marcus replied, pulling her into his arms. Though you should probably know that the company you work for, we just bought it last month. So technically, Sarah pulled back to stare at him in horror. 6 months later, Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the simple but elegant dress she had chosen for what Marcus had mysteriously described as an important family dinner. They had been navigating their relationship carefully since that evening in his carriage house, taking time to rebuild trust and establish new foundations based on complete honesty. The past months had been a whirlwind of adjustments. Meeting Marcus's family had been surprisingly warm and welcoming, particularly his mother, Elena, who had embraced Sarah with genuine affection and relief that her son had found someone who challenged him to be better. His father, David, had been more reserved but respectful, clearly appreciating Sarah's independence and refusal to be intimidated by the family's wealth. Sarah had insisted on keeping her job and her apartment, determined to maintain her own identity separate from Marcus's world. It had created some awkward moments, like when they attended charity galas where Sarah was seated in the section for significant others rather than the main table, or when business associates assumed she was Marcus's assistant rather than his fiancée. But Marcus had supported her choices completely, even when it meant explaining to confused social circles why his future wife insisted on taking the subway to work instead of using one of the family's drivers. The media attention had been the hardest part to adjust to. Once word leaked about Marcus Johnson Sterling's engagement to a marketing executive he met at work, the story had taken on a life of its own. Some outlets painted it as a modern fairy tale, while others suggested more cynical motives. Sarah had learned to ignore both the praise and the criticism, focusing instead on building a relationship with the man she loved. Ready? Marcus asked, appearing in the doorway of her apartment. Even after all these months, Sarah's heart still skipped when she saw him. Tonight he was dressed more formally than usual, in a dark suit that reminded her he had been attending important events his entire life. "Ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, though she felt a flutter of nervousness. Marcus had been acting strangely all week, secretive in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of the early days when he had been hiding his identity. When she had asked about it, he had simply said there was something important he needed to discuss with his family, and that he wanted her there for support. The drive to the family estate was quiet, with Marcus seeming lost in thought. Sarah studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his hands gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. "Marcus, you're making me nervous," she said finally. "What's really going on tonight?" He glanced at her, then pulled the car over to the side of the road. For a moment, Sarah's heart stopped, flashing back to that terrible day when he had revealed his true identity. But instead of delivering life-changing news, Marcus simply reached over and took her hand. "Sarah, I need you to know that whatever happens tonight, whatever my family says or doesn't say, it doesn't change how I feel about you. We're a team now, okay?" Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Marcus was pulling back onto the road, leaving her with more questions than answers. The family estate looked different tonight, with extra cars in the driveway and more lights on in the main house than usual. As they approached the front door, Sarah could hear the sound of multiple conversations coming from inside. "How many people are here?" Sarah asked. "Everyone," Marcus replied cryptically. The door was opened by Elena Johnson Sterling, who immediately pulled Sarah into a warm hug. "Sarah, dear, you look beautiful. Come in, everyone is so excited to see you." As they entered the main living room, Sarah was surprised to see not just Marcus's immediate family, but aunts, uncles, cousins, and several people she didn't recognize at all. At the center of the room stood David Johnson Sterling, holding what appeared to be a champagne flute and looking unusually formal. "Ah, there they are," David announced as Marcus and Sarah entered. "Now we can begin." Sarah felt Marcus's hand squeeze hers as his father cleared his throat and addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming tonight. As you know, this family has always believed in tradition, in honor, and in recognizing when someone has proven themselves worthy of our respect and trust." Sarah's confusion deepened. This felt like some kind of ceremony, but she had no idea what they were celebrating. "6 months ago," David continued, "my son brought home a young woman who has challenged every assumption we've ever made about what it means to be part of this family. Sarah Martinez has shown us that integrity, independence, and genuine love are worth more than any fortune we could ever accumulate." Marcus's grip on her hand tightened and Sarah could feel her heart beginning to race. "More importantly," David went on, "she has shown my son what it means to be loved for who he is, not what he has. And in return, Marcus has become the man we always hoped he would be. Someone who understands that true wealth comes from the relationships we build and the lives we touch." David raised his champagne glass and suddenly everyone in the room was doing the same. "Tonight we formally welcome Sarah into the Johnson Sterling family, not as an outsider looking in, but as someone who has already proven that she belongs here." The room erupted in applause and warm congratulations, but Sarah was still confused. She looked at Marcus, who was smiling but clearly nervous about something. "There's more," Marcus said quietly, then raised his voice to address the room. "Actually, there's something else I need to say, something I've been planning for weeks." The room fell quiet again, all eyes on Marcus and Sarah. To Sarah's complete shock, Marcus dropped to one knee right there in front of his entire extended family, pulling out a small velvet box. "Sarah Martinez," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "6 months ago you proposed to me in an empty office building, thinking I was someone I wasn't. Tonight I'm proposing to you as exactly who I am, all of who I am. Will you marry me?" Sarah stared down at him, tears streaming down her face. The ring in the box was breathtaking, not because of its size or cost, but because it was so perfectly her, simple, elegant, and classic, exactly what she would have chosen for herself. "The first time you proposed," Marcus continued, "you were taking a leap of faith. This time, We both know exactly what we're choosing. We're choosing each other, complications, and all. Through her tears, Sarah could see the faces of Marcus's family around the room, all watching with anticipation and genuine affection. These people, who could have rejected her as an outsider or a fortune hunter, had instead welcomed her with open arms and genuine love. "Yes," Sarah whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." The room exploded in celebration as Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. As he spun her around, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in one of the ornate mirrors on the wall, a successful, independent woman who had found love in the most unexpected place with the most unexpected person. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down and they found themselves alone on the estate's garden terrace, Sarah looked at her new engagement ring sparkling in the moonlight. "You know," she said, leaning against Marcus's chest as they looked out over the perfectly manicured grounds, "when I first proposed to you, I thought I was choosing love over security, romance over practicality." "And now?" Marcus asked, his arms tightening around her. "Now I realize I was just choosing you. And everything else, the money, the lifestyle, the complications, those are just details. What matters is that we chose each other, twice now, with complete honesty about who we are." Marcus kissed the top of her head, and Sarah could feel him smiling. "So what do you think? Can a billionaire and a marketing executive live happily ever after?" Sarah turned in his arms to face him, seeing not the heir to a fortune or the janitor she had first fallen for, but simply the man who had become her best friend, her greatest love, and her partner in building a life that was entirely their own. "I think," she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. "We're about to find out." As they stood together under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of unimaginable wealth but focused only on each other, Sarah realized that the impossible had indeed happened. She had found a love story that was bigger than social expectations, stronger than deception, and more valuable than all the money in the world. Sometimes the most extraordinary things really did come in the most ordinary packages. You just had to be brave enough to look past the surface to find them.